Hi, I'm Sophie Wolf, and I'm going to be discussing how the criminal justice system addresses fraud. So, the Department of Justice's definition of fraud is a misrepresentation of fact, whether that be intentional or negligent. So, the person does not need to intentionally give misleading information in order to be prosecuted for fraud. The proof needed to prosecute someone for fraud is also very relaxed, and the person pretty much just needs to prove that they were victimized in some way and harmed, whether that be emotionally or financially or both. So the people in charge of these guidelines are the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which was created in 1984 and is a part of the judicial branch. So their role is to distribute guidelines for the courts to follow whenever distributing punishments to criminals and what establishes something as a crime. So 18 U.S. Code number 1519 was put into effect in 2002 and was pretty much intended to increase the amount of prison lengths that can be given to financial crimes from a maximum 5 years to a maximum 20 years. This was largely intended in order to increase the amount of financial crimes that were prosecuted, and it did and largely resulted in overcriminalization of fraud. So the chart shows the sentencing for fraud crimes in 2019, and it shows the total cases that were prosecuted, and as well as the total cases receiving prison and the prison lengths. So the visual shows that 74% of cases were sent to prison out of all the fraud crimes prosecuted in 2019, and 64% of those cases had an over 12-month sentence. This is largely due to the lack of a graduated system in order to address fraud crimes and classify the severity of each type of crime, which exists with almost every other type of major crime throughout the United States. This type of system allows for the courts to follow a certain set of guidelines in order to classify the crime based on the harm caused, and then therefore distribute an appropriate punishment for the crime. Due to the inexistence of this system for fraud, many fraud criminals are sentenced to longer prison sentences than fits their crime and results in overcriminalization of fraud. So in order to address all these problems, our proposal is that the judicial system and the United States Sentencing Commission needs to take steps in order to create a more complex system for the punishment of fraud crimes. This would result in the appropriate sentencing to fit the crime, as the courts would be able to follow a certain set of guidelines in order to classify the crime based on the severity and the harm caused, and therefore distribute a punishment that fits the crime. This would also decrease overcriminalization, as criminals will not be given unfair sentences, but rather punishment that fits their crime. And therefore, this would help with prison overcrowding, as not as many people would be sentenced to prison, or they would be given a shorter sentencing length.
Hi, my name is Chinedu Obiakara, and our project, welcome to the specifics section. So what do we mean by the specifics section? Basically, I'm just going to be walking you through the who is going to be in charge of our proposal and the cost of our proposal to the judicial system, and also how our proposal is going to work and how it will create a change, basically. So for changes to happen, it has to start from the top of the pyramid. And from the top of the pyramid, in our case, it has to come all the way from the judicial system, from the judges all the way down to the local sheriff, to the local sheriff's office. Each person has to be in tune with what we're trying to achieve, and there has to be collaboration among every stakeholder in the system, basically. Well, cost in terms of cost, the overhead cost can be covered by the federal government, or the system itself, because they have money from fines, from bills, and money they've gotten from the public. They can as well fund themselves and cover the cost of our proposal. And getting to the last stage, how our fix is going to work. Well, the proposed fix will be a success, because then we are going to have degrees of fraud crimes. It's no longer going to be one size fits all. It's going to be persecution based on the level and the degree of fraud committed by the individual, and that would determine the extent and the level of the law he or she will face.
Hi, my name is Owen Bjornsson, and I had the proposal justification for my group. Too many times we see that fraudulent crimes are highly overcriminalized. Just to set an example, and this really ties into the point that reform needs to be at the top of our priority list for this, only because it is contributing to the population in our prison system. There's a large misconception that fraud criminals are given a lesser sentencing compared to other crimes. And this kind of ties into my third bullet, that communities push for higher sentencings. And these kind of work together in a negative fashion that really push sentencings for fraud crimes to be super, super high for crimes that really aren't that bad in hindsight. Yes, it's still fraud, but the amount of money that most of these fraud cases have taken from people aren't these $1 million cases that you hear about every couple of years. Most of them are not that. Oops, there we go. A little bit more bullet points. There is an insane lack of knowledge on sentencing practices throughout the U.S. that plays into why fraud is overcriminalized. And that comes from a lack of a consistent theory on the causation of punishment in the courtrooms. Sorry about that. I just got an email. And then on top of that, the sentence terms that are prescribed by the government are just too high. Then obviously plays back into the overpopulation and influx in our prison systems. One example is that mail and wire fraud is punishable up for 20 years. Just that increases the amount of inmates we have every year. And my final bullet point is a little bit of a statistic, excuse me, that if reform happened, we could free up the prison system, not necessarily by 8,500 people, because that would be releasing all of the fraudulent criminals or fraud criminals in our prison system, but 9,000 people, about 9,000 people, we could get a little bit over half of that. That's a lot, and that's a starting point for decreasing the size of our prisons.
Hello, my name is Sami Alashi, and I'm going to be talking about the alternate view of our proposal argument. One of the steps mentioned earlier to create a more complex or a more graduated system for the punishment of fraud crimes is to decrease over-criminalizing fraud crimes. And in order to do this, we mentioned earlier, we need to make changes to the judicial system, more specifically the United States Sentencing Commission that is responsible for fraud crimes. However, there are some people who believe that over-criminalizing fraud is okay because it creates a deterrent effect. So let me just share my screen here real quickly. One moment. Okay, there we go. Okay, so yeah, some people believe that over-criminalizing fraud is okay because it creates a deterrent effect, or which means that harsher punishments will discourage other people from committing the same criminal act. Most of us do believe that the reasons we have punishments is to discourage people from doing the punishment, from doing the act. It's a very common thing to agree with. However, this argument does have a problem because a person who commits a fraud act in modern day could be potentially imprisoned for no more than 20 years, according to the U.S. Code 1519 that was brought to life by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. First of all, there is no need for a maximum prison sentence to be 20 years for a fraud crime, especially when there is no graduated or a complex system for the punishment. It doesn't make any sense. It's cruel and unusual for minor or major cases. And we can see here in the graph that talks about the average length of sentence for defendants convicted of mail and wire fraud offenses. We can see that here that before 2002, which is when the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was enacted, we can see that the averages were just generally going up and down. There were no significant changes that is being observed here. But after the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, we can see that the average, the length of sentences were increasing, and they continue to increase if there's nothing done about it. So I encourage every one of you watching to step up and help us change and create a more complex system. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.
Hi, and welcome back. So far, we've seen strategies and ways that we could achieve our proposed fix to the crime fraud aspect of our judicial system. Doing this definitely is going to reduce prison overcrowding, because then it means lesser crime means lesser jail time. And also, the system could as well put out fine individuals instead of sending them to jail. Another positive aspect of our proposal is that it will give individuals the time and the opportunity to get out of jail early and make good with their life. And in general, all in all, this system is going to create equality in the judicial system of with respect to fraud crime moving forward. Thank you very much for your time.